7 weeks old, 2 a.m., and I was sitting on my kitchen floor, genuinely convinced I had broken my own baby. The crying had exploded out of nowhere. Hours of it. I tried everything: rocking, feeding, the walk, the bounce, the desperate phone flashlight in the face check to make sure nothing was wrong. Nothing worked. So I did what every exhausted parent does. I picked up my phone and typed the question I was too embarrassed to say out loud. Why won't my baby stop crying? And is it bad? And the first thing that came up flipped my stomach. Because half the internet was screaming that crying babies are damaged, and the other half was insisting that crying babies are secretly geniuses. Both can't be true. So which is it? I went down a research rabbit hole that lasted weeks, and what I found doesn't just settle the argument. It quietly reveals something about your baby that most parents will never figure out. Stay with me, because the part that actually matters comes near the end, and almost nobody tells you about it. Let's deal with the famous claim first, because you've probably seen it. Babies who cry more turn out smarter. It sounds like feel-good nonsense you'd ignore, except it's not made up. It traces back to one of the biggest child development studies ever run by the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. Over 1,300 kids, tracked for years. And buried in that data was something strange. A lot of the babies who were rated difficult, more intense, more reactive, the ones who screamed bloody murder the second a parent left the room, those same kids often grew into sharp, capable, high-performing children. So the headline checks out. Crying babies can become brilliant kids. But here's where it gets interesting, because the internet took that finding and chopped off the one condition that makes the whole thing work. And without that condition, the claim is basically useless. Worse, it's misleading. What's the missing piece? Stay with that question, because it's the entire point of this video. To explain it, I have to introduce you to one of the most quietly mind-bending ideas in all of child psychology. Researchers call it differential susceptibility. I know, terrible name. So a pediatrician named Dr. Thomas Boyce gave it a better one. He split all children into two types: orchids and dandelions. Think about a dandelion for a second. You can drop it anywhere. Crack in the sidewalk, bad soil, no sun, too much sun, doesn't matter. It grows. It's basically unbreakable. Most kids, it turns out, are dandelions. Tough, adaptable, fine almost anywhere. But an orchid? An orchid is a completely different animal. Put an orchid in the wrong conditions and it collapses, wilts faster and harder than any dandelion ever would. It looks fragile, weak even. For decades, that's exactly what scientists assumed these sensitive, reactive, cry-a-lot kids were. Fragile, more likely to be damaged by stress, by chaos, by anything going wrong. And then the researchers looked closer, and they found something that flipped the entire field on its head. Yes, orchid kids did worse in bad environments, but in good ones? With warm, responsive, attuned care? They didn't just catch up to the dandelions, they blew past them, higher performing, more socially capable, better than the easygoing kids. The exact same trait that looked like weakness was actually a superpower in disguise, an extraordinary sensitivity to whatever the world handed them, for better and for worse. So now look at your crying baby again. Because here's the reframe that changes everything. The baby who cries the loudest, who feels everything at maximum volume, who refuses to let a single discomfort slide, that's very often an orchid. And by researchers' estimates, roughly 1 in 5 babies is. That's the kid sitting in the front row of human potential, as long as someone shows up for them. And that is the condition the internet deleted. Crying babies are smarter. False. The truth is sharper, and honestly more empowering. A baby who cries more is often a more sensitive, more responsive baby. And that sensitivity turns into genius-level potential only when it's met with a parent who keeps answering the call. Which means the most powerful thing you can do at 2 a.m. isn't to silence the crying. It's to keep being the soil that orchid grows in. You, sleep-deprived, unsure, half-defeated you, are the deciding variable. Not the crying. You. But hold on. Because there's a second myth hiding here, and it points the opposite direction. And this is the one that quietly tortures good parents. Because while it's wrong to think crying guarantees a genius, it's just as wrong, and way more common, to assume all that crying means something is broken. And most of the time, it's not temperament, it's not intelligence, it's not you. It's just biology, running on a timer. Scientists actually mapped this out. There's a thing called the infant crying curve, and it is eerily predictable. A landmark study by Dr. Ronald Barr, published in the journal Pediatrics, found that crying climbs in the first weeks of life, peaks somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks, and then drops off hard by 3 to 4 months. And here's the wild part. This same curve shows up everywhere. North America, Europe, remote communities with completely different parenting styles. It even shows up in other primates. Let that land for a second, because it's huge. The peak you're suffering through isn't a malfunction. It's a phase nearly every baby on Earth marches through on roughly the same schedule. Barr built a whole framework around this to stop parents from panicking, and he called it the period of purple crying. And purple isn't the color, it's an acronym. The peak around 2 months, the unexpected timing, the way it resists soothing no matter what you do, the pain-like face even when nothing hurts, how long-lasting it gets, and how it ambushes you in the evening, every single night. The entire reason that framework exists is to tell wrecked parents one thing. This is normal. It has an ending, and the volume of it says nothing bad about your baby or about you. So that night on the kitchen floor, convinced I'd failed, I was actually watching the textbook peak of a universal curve. My wife clocked it before I did. She kept saying, "I think this is just the stage." I was too busy Googling disasters to believe her. But now you might be thinking, okay, so when does crying actually mean something's wrong? And this is where it matters that I don't sugarcoat it, because the science draws a real line. Normal crying, even the brutal colicky kind, climbs and then fades. It follows the curve. What researchers flag as different is crying that's prolonged, persistent, and inconsolable well past that 3 to 4 month window, with no clear cause and no sign of slowing down. One NICHD analysis found that a small group of kids who cried in that prolonged, never-fading way beyond the normal period had, on average, slightly lower developmental scores years later. Which, notice, is the exact mirror image of the "Crying Babies Are Geniuses" headline. And that's the whole lesson. Crying is not a slogan in either direction. You cannot read your baby's future off how loud they are tonight. The thing to watch isn't the volume, it's the pattern. Peak and fade in the early months? Textbook, healthy, expected. Crying that keeps escalating past when it should ease and just doesn't stop? That's the one worth a calm chat with your pediatrician. I'm not a doctor, but every source I found agrees on that line. So pull it all together and the picture finally makes sense. Crying is not a report card. The baby screaming in your arms might be a hypersensitive little orchid whose loud feelings are proof of how deeply they take in the world. Or it might just be the universal 6-week peak that every parent white-knuckles through. Both are completely normal. And in both, the crying is never the thing that decides where it leads. The response is yours. I keep thinking about that guy on the kitchen floor, certain the crying was proof he'd ruined something. If I could reach back and tell him one thing, it'd be this: that crying wasn't a verdict. It was a tiny person reaching for the world the only way they knew how. And the fact that he kept reaching back, exhausted and clueless and scared, was already the single most important thing he could do. You don't have to figure out if your baby's an orchid or a dandelion. You don't have to measure a thing. You just have to keep being the steady presence that turns all that sensitivity into strength. And if you're here, awake, learning this, wondering, your baby's already in better hands than you think. If this changed how you hear your baby's crying even a little, hit subscribe. We drop a new video every week, pulling back the curtain on what's really going on inside your baby's mind. And a quick like genuinely helps another wrecked parent find this at 2 a.m., right when they need it most.